Good morning, Smogon. Today we are doing another SSOU commentary. My name is Munith. I'll be your host today, and my co-commentator is Ruft. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Ruft. You might know me from being like the co-OU leader, I guess, with Finchinator. But I also love like SSOU a lot. So I'm in SPL. I'm a sub for the Bigs, for whom Hayburner's playing. So yeah, I'm very excited to analyze this replay between two very good SS players, I'd say.
Yeah, what are your initial thoughts at Team Preview here?
Well, if you look at Hayburner's team, this is like a pretty classic six, you could say. There's like three setup mons, so Volgrona with Quiver Dance, obviously. Zeraora, which should be Bulk Up, and the Dragonite, which should be Dragon Dance. And then there's three mons that support that core. Like, they set up hazards so that the sweepers have an easier time sweeping. And on this six, the Clefable is often Healing Wish. So if one of these sweepers like goes for a sweep, doesn't damage, and switches out, the Clefable should be able to Healing Wish it back up, so it can go for a second attempt. But yeah, it might be Healing Wish, might not be, we'll have to see. And then if you look at Damien's team, the Dragapult is probably choice specs, and that's actually a pretty big issue for Hayburner, I'd say, because spec Shadow Ball is, like, in SS in general, it's quite tough to switch into. But on this team especially, there's no ghost resist, as is often the case in SS. But so if Hayburner switches a mon into the Shadow Ball, like usually you'd switch like a Pokemon into it that can take 2 Shadow Balls. But of course, the Shadow Ball is a 20% chance to drop special defense. Hayburner could get into trouble quite quickly there. So you'll have to do his best to contain a Dragapult for sure. And then if you look at the Urshifu, that's also going to be quite annoying to deal with, because the only mon that resists both of Urshifu's stabs is Dragonite, and if you switch Dragonite hard into Urshifu on like U-turn, then you have multi-scale that's just gone for free, so that's not good if you're Hayburner. The Slowking is also quite annoying, because Galarian Slowking's usual moves are like Future Sight, Sludge Bomb, Scald, Flamethrower, and like none of Hayburner's mons can really switch into like all of those moves, and even just Future Sight, like a combination of Future Sight and Urshifu's Close Combat is really threatening, because the only mon that resists Future Sight is Ferrothorn, which is obviously weak to Close Combat. Heatran can be problematic, and depends on the Dragonite set, because like if it is any Heatran set as well, because if the Heatran has like Wisp or Toxic, and if it's Dragon Dance, Dragonite without Heal Bell, that's gonna be an issue, because that's the only like real fire resist. And other than that, the lander is probably just like standard defog, special offense, and Weavile should just be Swords Dance. So I think in general, like Damien has a better matchup, but Hayburner definitely has like a lot of tools. If he is able to contain Damien's threats and make progress for himself, like one of those three setup sweepers might be able to steal the game. I think he definitely has good chops.
Alright, let's get this thing started. Hayburner leads with Clefable as Damien leads off with Urshifu, clicks U-turn, and that does 11% to the Clefable. What does that U-turn damage tell us?
Well, 11% is quite interesting, because, I mean, Hayburner probably is going to the damage calc immediately. And the 11% on a Clefable, that's like standard Clefable is physically defensive, that's quite interesting, because it's not like Choice Band normally does more than 11%. And if it's non-choice band and it's Jolly, that should do less than 11%. So something this small, like this chip damage, which a lot of players might gloss over, actually tells us that this Urshifu should be adamant and non-choice band, which is quite important info to have this early in the game.
Yeah, for sure. Clefable uses knockoff on the Slowking, knocks off an Assault Vest, so you know it's probably going to be an offensive 4-attacks AV set. The Slowking switches back out into Urshifu on the U-turn from Landorus, as Dragonite comes in on another U-turn from the Urshifu, breaking the multi-scale, but Hayburner uses Roost to keep it intact so that he doesn't take as much damage from the Future Sight. Takes 60% from Shadow Ball and Dragon Dances. We see him
Yeah, I
use
think this.
Roost again there. Very risky Roost, but aggressive play on the Dragapult being forced out there.
Yeah, I think Hayburner kind of made like two very risky moves in a row, but kind of worked because the Dragonite, it could have went for Draco Meteor on the Dragonite stay-in, but yeah, Shadow Ball is the more free move, you could say, because there's no resist, and Hayburner knows that, so that's why he stayed with the Dragapult and Dragonanced. And because Jolly Dragonite +1, it does outspeed Dragapult, and Damien's Dragapult is very good in this game, so he doesn't want to risk losing it to like maybe an Ice Punch from a Dragonite. It made sense that Damien switched out, but if Damien stayed and Shadow Ball again, then yeah, Hayburner could have lost his Dragonite there. So two risky turns in a row that Hayburner played pretty well, I'd say. That made it so that even though Feature Side went up with Urshifu in, he didn't really have any major losses on his team. So quite well played by Hayburner, I'd say.
Yeah, what I will say is the other part of that Dragonite against Dragapult 1v1 is that due to Clefable and Ferrothorn being two of the main Dragapult checks in the back on this team, thudding into them with a Draco Meteor on a switch out would be a huge momentum loss, and with these more offensive teams, you really can't afford that. Something like a Ferrothorn coming in and clicking Leech Seed, for example, is going to be super annoying.
Yeah, for sure. I think both players recognize that Shadow Ball is the play there, and so that's why we saw what happened there.
You see Hayburner send his Ferrothorn into Heatran as Damien makes a great play and double switches into Air Balloon Heatran. Back in the day, Air Balloon pretty much always meant that Heatran was Flash Fire offensive so that it could wall other Heatran, but recently people have started using Flame Body and more defensive EVs on Air Balloon Heatran a little bit more, so it doesn't telegraph the set as much as it used to.
Yeah, like the combination of Flame Body and Balloon is also quite good against Earthquake Melmetal, because you essentially force it to... Yeah, you can't Earthquake, so you double Iron Bash, and then it's 2 hits into a Flame Body Heatran. It's quite likely that the Melmetal also gets burned. So yeah, Balloon really doesn't... Like, it could still be Flash Fire, it could be Flame Body. I think, if you look at Damien's team, he's quite weak to Kartana, so I'd like to believe it's probably Flame Body, which would be good for Hayburner's Volcarona.
Yeah, Rillaboom as well is a threat to this team.
Yeah, I agree.
Alright. The Magma Storm does come out, as you see Sitwitch into Landorus. Coincidentally, Flame Body Balloon is quite good against Landorus itself. Misses the Magma Storm that could have KO'd that Landorus. Dragonite comes in and does click Roost again on the Dragapult switch. Damien clicks U-turn as Hayburner does stay in and Dragon Dances on the switch to Weavile. He is forced out now by the threat of Ice Shard. Gets Ferrothorn in. And
yeah, I think you could have argued, okay, yeah, Hayburner, he should have expected the Weavile to come, so he should have Earthquake immediately, which is fair, because like that's the aggressive play, you do like 50 or 60 to the Weavile. But I think Dragonite is also fair, because you essentially force the Weavile to Ice Shard, because like if it doesn't Ice Shard, it might just die to like a +1 attack from the Dragonite. So forcing it to Ice Shard gives you the opportunity to bring in Ferrothorn and get up the spikes as Hayburner does. So I think it's like two different ways of making progress, and I think both are valid, so yeah.
Yeah, I definitely can understand the rationale for Dragon Dance there. You also don't want to do something like Earthquake on a switch to Landorus and just thud into it as he's trying to get his Intimidate on you, or what have you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree.
Right, we see the spike come out on the switch to Heatran. It has gotten its balloon popped by the Landorus U-turn earlier, so it does have to be wary of Dragon Dance, Dragonite's Earthquake as well. Landorus comes out, gets some leftovers, baits a Draco Meteor, goes out into Clefable. Really well played by Hayburner there.
Yeah, I agree.
Something that's a little interesting there is that Landorus is not dead to Shadow Ball at that percentage. So going out into Landorus baits that Dragapult into trying to KO you. And you can pull that switch back out into Clefable, knowing that if he Shadow Balls as you stay in on like a Toxic or a knockoff, it's disastrous with how good Dragapult is this game. So he has to either go for the Draco Meteor there or try and double switch to cover both. which is obviously very difficult in this game state.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Hayburner did well to switch into Clefable there.
The U-turn come out from the Landorus.
Yeah, I also think it's very nice how Damien switched in the Landorus on the turn away from Clefable, and then went to Slowking on the knock. So this Clefable is like, it's kind of threatening in its own way with Thunderwave and knockoff, but Damien really pivoted on it well, so the Lando is unknocked and the Slowking is unparalyzed.
Yeah, definitely a good outcome for him, as Landorus comes in on the Scald and gets burnt. So Landorus is basically just going to use its last breath to set up Stealth Rock and get whatever chip damage it can against a potential switch in from the Slowking side. Dragonite comes in and does go straight for Earthquake, like you mentioned earlier. Takes 61 from Future Sight. It was alluded to earlier, but that's obviously a max special attack Slowking, which is pretty standard on Assault Vest, but it's going to be very threatening to these types of bulky offenses if it can get in the right spots, like on Clefable and Ferrothorn, etc.
Yeah, for sure. And we also see Icicle Crash from Weavile, which is quite nice in this game because, like, if it went for Triple Axle, it would have died to Iron Barb's recoil. So Icicle Crash is actually quite handy for it. Like, you usually see Triple Axle, but the benefit of Icicle Crash not making contact is quite nice here.
Yeah, even against the Clefable, it didn't show leftovers, so it's going to be either Sticky Barb or Rocky Helmet. In both cases, avoiding contact is a good thing.
Yep.
Leech Seed comes out from the Ferrothorn on the switch to Heatran.
I actually think Leech Seed is like a very smart play there because, like, okay, you could argue just go for like a second spike, but as you should know, the second spike is a lot less impactful than the first or the third because, like, the first spike does 12.5% damage on switch-ins, and 2 spikes does like 16.7. So the second spike is only like a 4% increase. So, and Leech Seed, like if you look at Damien's team, there's nothing blocking a Leech Seed. So going for Leech Seed is very smart, I think, because it heals up the Ferrothorn, and it also makes it so that switching into that Heatran after it has been Leech Seeded is a lot easier.
Yeah, just to add on to that, Leech Seed is just so free against this team. I feel like you can kind of click it every time you're in at this point. The Heatran doesn't have leftovers. The Slowking is going to be taking hazards every time it comes in. Damien is just going to be hard-pressed to find an answer to it.
Yep, I agree.
We do see the Slowking come in on that switch to Clefable. That Clefable switch is interesting because Damien did have Heatran out against Ferrothorn, so it's a very aggressive play, predicting Damien to double switch out into something like a Weavile to try and catch that double switch from Hayburner himself, and ended up getting forced out by the Slowking. We do see a Sludge Bomb come out, and a switch into Zeraora on the Future Sight. Hayburner is going to just fire off a knockoff here. With the Landorus at 100% HP, this thing just is not going to be too valuable, so you're going to want to make whatever progress you can at this point. And that's more or less what we're going to see.
I quite like how he just used Zeraora to make progress, because it's not going to win at this point.
Yeah, and he gets a great position where Damien doesn't get a chance to get his hazards up or defog with Lando, and then Dragonite, which we alluded to potentially being jolly earlier, just outspeeds and KOs the Landorus with Ice Punch.
Yep. Now the big issue comes in, like the Dragapult with the freest Shadow Ball of all time.
Yeah, does 47% and gets the special defense drop. That is big, as before Hayburner's Ferrothorn was not dead to Shadow Ball, and it managed to... And it would have been able to threaten out the Dragapult, even heal up with Leech Seed and click knock off something, but now it's just dead to the next Shadow Ball.
Yeah, it's very fortunate. But he did get a Magma dodge earlier, I guess, so I guess it's justice in a way.
Yeah, that's fair. Ferrothorn does go down to that next Shadow Ball. Clefable comes in to try and force out the Dragapult, but Damien just stays in, gets Thunder Waved, and switches out to Slowking here. as we see a knockoff.
I quite like how Damien actually switches out, because I think he recognized that with the Dragapult paralyzed, if he killed the Clefable right there, because yeah, even with the paralysis, the Dragapult is going to be faster than the Clefable, so he could have just taken the KO there. But I think he recognized that that does give a prime setup opportunity for Volcarona to come in after and just Quiver Dance before the Dragapult can do anything. So I think it's quite smart that he recognized that and switched out Dragapult, didn't just take the free KO as many others probably would, and recognized that he's in the endgame now. He has to look for an opportunity to like avoid getting swept by Volcarona.
Yeah, especially with the paralysis, like you mentioned, that Volcarona is going to get that +1 special defense from Quiver Dance before you're able to act, which is going to make it take a lot less damage and potentially be out of range of something like an Urshifu Aqua Jet, depending on what its EV spread is.
Yeah, exactly.
We see another Thunder Wave come out from the Clefable, trying to catch a switch to something like Heatran to preserve HP, as Damien does manage to get a threatening Future Sight off. So this turn we're going to see something go down to Future Sight, as Hayburner is just going to sacrifice that Dragonite, as Damien makes a very nice positioning play here, going out to Heatran, as that's going to be your best natural matchup against the last two. And we see a Steel Beam come out to get the KO on Clefable. That is huge.
Yeah, I think that like choosing between, like the Heatran was in, choosing between Clefable or Volcarona is kind of like a hard decision, because you kind of have to like think, okay, this Heatran, what's gonna be like its final move? Because like I think Hayburner thought that it might have Toxic, so that's why he went Clefable first before Volcarona on that Heatran. So yeah, if then the Heatran had Taunt, or yeah, as we saw, Steel move, then the Clefable gets KO'd by the Heatran. So now the Clefable got KO'd and he's Volcarona against Urshifu, which, yeah, it's a pretty bad position if you just look at it straight away, but we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, one thing to note here is that, as Ruft mentioned at the start of the game, that Urshifu is revealed to be Adamant Nature due to the U-turn damage on Clefable, so it is slower than Volcarona, barring an extremely bulky set. And sometimes Urshifu can run Aqua Jet, which is another thing the Volcarona has to be wary about. So let's see how this endgame plays out. We see the Volcarona outspeed the Urshifu and KO it with Psychic, as Dragapult comes in on the Volcarona to try and salvage the game with a critical hit Draco Meteor on Quiver Dance, but he's not able to get that. And Volcarona is just going to clean up the game, as there is no way Ice Shard is going to do enough damage to KO this.
Yeah,
and
the
that is
Urshifu,
the end of the game.
Urshifu not showing Aqua Jet basically sealed the game, because if it had Aqua Jet, or if it used Aqua Jet, then it should do like at least like 50. And then if the Volcarona goes for Psychic, then you can just go Weevil after and go and knock off. So yeah, either the Urshifu didn't have Aqua Jet, or if it did have Aqua Jet, then Damien unfortunately choked, I fear.
Yeah, it does turn out that this Urshifu did have Aqua Jet, and Damien misattributed the Volcarona's EV spread, believing that it was a set that was bulky enough to live the combination of Aqua Jet from Urshifu and knockoff from Weavile. I will say that with the additional support of Dragapult in the back, it would have taken a lot for Volcarona to get through in this endgame, but I can ultimately understand where Damien came from. My main impression of this game is that Hayburner did make a lot of heads-up plays to navigate his way out of a tough matchup. He did get a little bit of luck early on with that Magma Storm dodge on the Landorus, but it ended up equaling out in the end as he lost his Ferrothorn to a Shadow Ball Spadef drop from the Dragapult, and clutched out that endgame with the Volcarona.
Yeah, I think Hayburner overall played really well too. Like, he was able to contain most of Damien's threats quite well for most of the game, and then like I also really liked how at one point he was able to make progress with the Zeraora. Like, he recognized that, okay, Zeraora has done nothing this game, and we're already reaching the end game. If I use the Zeraora now to make progress, that can definitely give me an opportunity. And yeah, we saw Zeraora, it knocked the Landorus. After that, the Dragonite could take out the Landorus, and that really opened the game for Volcarona, as we saw. What's also interesting, like, we didn't really saw see in this game, but the Clefable, because I'm Hayburner's teammate, we made the Clefable Sticky Barb, as you mentioned before. Because Sticky Barb with Zeraora is like it's really good synergy, because if Zeraora can knock off, it can use knock off on Landorus. And if the Landorus uses U-turn and it touches, makes contact with Clefable, then it would steal the Sticky Barb, and then over time the damage would really rack up. And that could open the game for Zeraora. But yeah, as we saw in this game, there weren't really any opportunities for Zeraora to do that. What Hayburner could have also done, because his Landorus is knockoff, like at the start, he could have used knockoff instead of U-turn on the Urshifu. And so Urshifu would be knocked, and then the next turn or later in the game, he could have went Clefable on Urshifu, and then the Urshifu would have Sticky Barb. But yeah, that would have probably been hard as well. Like, I think all of Hayburner's plays definitely made a lot of sense. And I especially like how, just from like a tiny bit of info, turn 1, like that 11% that Urshifu did to Clefable with U-turn, that he could use that info. Like, a lot of people, like, I think that separates like good players from great players. Like, he really knew that info, he knew from that his Volcarona would be faster. And so, in his mind, this endgame, he knew that Volcarona would be very important, because he knew that if the Urshifu didn't have Aqua Jet, which if it's bad, it usually doesn't. Like, it usually does like Taunt. It can have Aqua Jet, but I think Taunt is a bit more common. So Hayburner was able to capitalize on that, on the fact that Volcarona is faster. And I really like how it became like full circle, essentially.
Yeah, another thing to note about that potential opening that you mentioned is that if he did click knockoff with the Landorus instead of U-turn, he would not have been able to roost up his Landorus against the Urshifu. So he would have taken an attack from Urshifu and a Future Sight after being blown out of multi-scale. So I think ultimately Hayburner did actually make the correct play in that early game in order to keep his team healthy enough to mitigate some of the threats on the opposing team.
Yeah, U-turn was definitely totally fair, yeah. Because the combination of Future Sight and Urshifu, as I mentioned at the start, yeah, the U-turn definitely made sense to try to contain that, like contain the damage. Yeah. So yeah, I think overall, I think both really made some fantastic plays, but in the end, yeah, Hayburner managed to come out on top.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Have a wonderful day. Make sure to follow us on Twitch to see these battles covered live every Sunday from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Like the video if you did, and have a wonderful day.